Hi, everyone. Welcome to Globe Trippin, a travel show that's sure to bring you fun and exciting adventures both near and far. I'm your host, Beth Everts. Today, we're going to go on a backcountry bike trip in Utah with our guest, Scott Hunter. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, Beth. I'm glad to be here with you.
Excellent. Nice to have you. I know we're all kind of holed up at home during this pandemic, but I am really looking forward to talking to everybody and talking to you specifically about your recent bicycle trip in the backcountry. And I'm thrilled to kind of bring this to our viewers to let them know that there's a lot that we can still do, even though we might not want to hop on an airplane or take a cross-country trip necessarily, but we're going to start with Utah and then we'll go from there. So why Utah? What happened? How'd you pick a map, throw a dot on it and say, I'm going to go to Utah to do this?
Sure. Well, cycling is, or vacationing or taking cycling vacations or touring by bicycle is just something that not everybody does. But I think the pace of it is just the right speed, right? It's a little slower than a car, but a little faster than walking. So, and though you can go bicycle tour in Utah, which is what this talk is going to be about, you can also go right out your back door and get started. And it doesn't really take a special bike to do bicycle touring or bike packing, which is a little bit more along the lines of what this was. Bike packing being defined as more in the backcountry, like backpacking. But really, it doesn't require anything special, and it's a good social distance activity for sure. So I think, and it can be a lot of fun. Why Utah? I think that it was a different kind of wilderness for me. I'm an outdoorsman here in New England and feel pretty comfortable in that atmosphere, but you get me out of this environment and into a desert type wilderness, and I'm pretty far out of my comfort zone. So there was a lot to learn there. Your trip is really based around water. And figuring out how to make sure you have enough water to drink in the backcountry. So that was kind of an interesting part of this trip.
Oh, that's interesting. I can't wait to dive into that and have you tell our viewers how exactly you handled that throughout your trip. So tell us a little bit about how you prep for a trip like this. I'm not an avid biker. I love to hop on the bike every once in a while. I go around the streets. I have in my head these visions of grandeur that one day I will do these backcountry, kind of backpacking, but on a bike tours. But I wouldn't even know where to start. So how'd you start?
So I think that, of course, physical fitness is a significant aspect to it. And for me, I want to make sure that I have a good time on my trip. So the preparation in physical fitness and making sure that you're ready for a trip like this, you want to go out there and you don't want to be sore and that wouldn't be any fun. So you want to make sure you're ready physically. And to do that, it's just a whole lot of pedaling. For this particular trip was in March. So while it was a pretty mild winter this past winter, I was able to get outside quite a bit on a bicycle. But I also did a fair amount of indoor biking and spin classes. And that helps get you ready for that as well. Of course, there's the purchase of a bike. And like I said, any bike is a bike touring bike. Whatever bike you have can get you started, right? So I think that's a real important piece to this, is that it doesn't take a special bike, although I did get a pretty special bike for this particular trip because I wanted to really enjoy myself. I think that matters too, to have the right bike for the right job, a road bike for the roads and a mountain bike for the mountains. So it's important to have the right bicycle. And of course, there's the whole camping aspect to all of this and all of that gear. So getting ready for a trip like this takes a fair amount of preparation and planning. It really started in October the year before when I thought about which bike I wanted to use. I have a lot of the backpacking type things like a tent, a sleeping bag, a camp stove, and those types of things. So I have a lot of that type of equipment. So if you don't, you have to gather it, and then you have to figure out how to get it all to some place like Utah, in which case it's you ship it. And shipping a bicycle and equipment has become pretty affordable using somebody like FedEx. So that's part of the planning as well.
That's pretty neat. And I'm sure at the end of our show, we can put up some good, useful links for people and nice lists that if somebody's interested in kind of following a similar path that you did, they'll be able to definitely Absolutely. All right. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you started? We've got the preparation. You're getting yourself in shape. You decided to make sure you had a decent bike that you would feel comfortable with, which I think everybody should make sure they have. Real quick on that, if people wanted to take a trip like this but not have a bike or purchase a bike, can they rent them?
Oh, sure. That would be an option for sure.
Okay. Okay.
And you just want to know what you wanted to rent when you get there and check with the bike shop before you went there to make sure they'd have the type of bike that you wanted for the type of trip that you wanted to take. So that would certainly be an option as well.
Awesome. All right. So how'd you start in terms of where you wanted to go in Utah, the routes that you were going to plan, and you're going to get ready to, I'm assuming, hop on a plane and meet all your gear out there?
So you just mentioned, and that is the logistics of all of this and how it all plays together, right? So a couple of weeks before I leave, I go to the bike shop, have my bike taken apart and boxed, and they call FedEx and it gets shipped out there. I call the bike shop a couple of days before I leave to make sure it's gotten to the bike shop and that they're able to put it back together. So some of those logistical pieces. How did I decide where to go? I knew what kind of environment I wanted to be in. I had visited Utah a couple of years before, and I knew I had visited Canyonlands National Park specifically, and I knew I wanted to do what's called the White Rim Trail. And the first part of the trip was there, right? And I knew it was a 100-mile loop. It's a trail, it's a four-wheel drive road, just a single lane. And there are a lot of places there that I don't know as though I'd really want to do in a vehicle, even if it was four-wheel drive in a Jeep, even if I was renting it, you know. But
Yep, yep. So why don't you have a map, I think, right, that you can show us sort of how you started?
Sure, you want me to go to that now? I can do that.
That'd be great.
All right, so let's, oh, I'm going to share my screen. And we'll get that big for you. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
All right. So producing these shows in Zoom is new for all of us, right? So, but a lot of fun. So this is a map of the White Rim Trail, and it's designated by this double line that goes around. You'll find that Canyonlands National Park is a place where the Green River and the Colorado River, the same Colorado River that goes through the Grand Canyon, come together, and it's the confluence of those two. So Island in the Sky is a section of the park. The other sections of Canyonlands National Park are the Maze and the Needles. But mostly what the White Rim Trail is it goes around the base of Island in the Sky, which is a huge mesa. And most people that visit Island in the Sky or Canyonlands National Park simply stay on the dark colored roads up here at the top of that mesa and look down at the area that we traveled through.
That's pretty neat. So you flew into where when you started to head out?
Thank you. Yeah, so I flew into Salt Lake City, and at that point, got a hotel room for the night, stayed overnight, then rented a car the next day, and drove down to Moab, Utah. Moab, Utah is like the adventure capital of Utah. Everything, all the mountain biking, all of two national parks right within Moab, Arches and Canyonlands, and so many other state parks and just natural, beautiful areas that to visit. Really all over Utah, but especially in that section.
That's neat. And then you got into Salt Lake, you drove down to Moab. And before we move on to some of your amazingly gorgeous photos about your trip and a little video, how did you get yourself ready in terms of, you talked about water being an issue and we'll get into that, but what about other supplies that you may have needed to go along with the gear and the bike that you obviously picked up along the way that was shipped out? So what else did you need while you were there?
So absolutely. So some of the first steps to a trip like this is first stopping off at the bike shop and picking up my bike, and any other last minute supplies as far as those type of technical equipment goes. However, really the next stop is to the grocery store. I visited the grocery store there in Moab and picked up the food that I would need for about a week. I was going out on this part of the trip for about 3 days. So, and I think the other piece to all of that is, in terms of getting ready, is intel, right? Just getting the
Mhm.
knowledge about the area you're going to go visit. And how did I get that? Well, I went on Facebook to a website called, or a Facebook site called Utah Bikepackers, and met some other people that have been in the areas that I wanted to visit, and they were able to tell me about, hey, this is how you get water. This is how you filter water there. This is how you use a spice called alum in order to
Mhm.
get the silt that's in the water to filter out. So just little pieces of information. There's no other way to get it except from the locals that are there. And while I was on that website, I did meet a friend who's become a good friend of mine that I did this trip with. You're going to see some pictures of him. His name is Patrick, and Patrick's an avid bike packer that lives in Salt Lake City. So I met he and in his van and my friend van um, at at the commencement of this trip.
That's awesome. All right. So let's take us on your trip.
Get right into it. So like I said, it's a circular route. And this is a picture of my friend Patrick in the foreground and Van in the background there. And this is, I think, the day before we're ready to leave. So we get to a place where we can camp overnight and meet each other and get to know each other. And from there, we take a quick little trip on the first evening, see what kind of route we're going to be taking. So I think we're at the top of an area here called um, Schaefer Trail,
Mm,
which is a series of switchbacks. Basically, it's a cliff that there's a series of switchbacks that go down that. And I have some photos of that. So first night's camping trip, sunset, and the sunsets and sunrises out there are spectacular.
that's
Uh,
beautiful.
Patrick is a professional photographer and takes much better pictures than I do. What's neat about it out there, and you'll notice that in this picture, I'm dressed with pretty much every piece of clothing that I brought with me, because it's 30 degrees or just below the first morning of the ride. Out in the distance here, and you'll see this in some other pictures as well, you see the LaSalle mountain range. So
Mhm.
this is mid-March, and everything is elevation. All your weather is dependent on elevation in Utah. So while I'm at around 6,000 feet here, most of the trip is at 4,000 feet, 2,000 feet below that. So um, that it makes the weather really dependent. So I see everything on this trip from 30 to 70 degrees. No
Wow.
doubt I got a sunburn. There's no shade in Utah. And definitely got a sunburn out there, but the mornings were cold.
Which we can tell, especially where you start at this higher elevation. You have a couple of things on your bike, and then I'm going to let you continue on the journey, taking us on this journey. You have a few packs in the front and a couple of packs in the back, and obviously you're wearing a good amount of layers, which I'm sure as you get down in further into the valley, if you will, you do shed those. But tell us a little bit about those packs as you head off.
Yeah, so this particular bike is set up to carry a lot of gear. It's really a tank. It's known as a Surly ECR is the brand and model of the bike. And it's got racks in the front, racks in the back. And one of the reasons for that is I planned on carrying a lot of water because I wouldn't have access to water for at least 2 days. So the suggestion
Wow.
is to bring a gallon of water per day per person. Well, you can do the math. So that's 2 gallons of water just to get this trip started. That's 16 pounds of water. So there's 16 pounds of water on this bike at this time that this picture was taken.
Wow.
There's a tent on the bike, on the back of the bike in that green bag. There's a sleeping bag and a sleeping pad. My tent poles are in there. There's a frame pack that is sitting within the frame of the bike where I keep a lot of my food and other gear. And there's panniers in the front. The orange packs are pannier packs. And while I don't use those for every bike packing trip because I just don't need to bring that much stuff. But right now in this picture, they're partially empty because I'm wearing most of the clothes that are going to be in them in about 2 hours from the time that this picture is taken because it gets hot.
All right. Okay, off we go.
All right, so we're at the top of the mesa, and then we come down the Schaefer Trail. So you can see it's pretty much a sheer cliff with a series of switchbacks that come all the way down approximately 2,000 feet. So not an area you'd want to take a fall on. and as I've grown older, I've become more cautious with heights, I think, but so not also out of my comfort level, I would say. But I'm
Definitely
glad
out
I
of
did.
mine.
You have to go down there in order to get to the places you want to go visit. So I gladly took that trip. Here's another angle of those switchbacks going down Schaefer Trail, and it drops off pretty
Significant. Yeah.
fast along the edges. So needless to say, I stayed on the inside edge for most of that. Would you like to see a video of that Patrick took with a
I,
GoPro camera?
I think that'd be really cool. It gives our viewers a sense of really what it's like to be biking on these trails.
Sure.
Yes, we're talking desert. So we're talking a little bit more of a dry, arid format a little bit, depending on
Oh,
the elevation.
yeah, definitely dry, but a whole range of temperature for sure.
That's
So
neat.
a lot of people think desert and they think hot.
Hot.
And in
Yeah.
March, like I said, it was every day was 30 degrees in the morning, 70 degrees in the afternoon. So just a huge range, a bigger range than we're used to here anyway. So let's see what I can do for you with this video. And of course, anybody could go to YouTube and find this video if they wanted to see the whole 8 minutes of it. But I'll just play a couple seconds of this. And this is Patrick coming down by me, and
That's very cool.
just to give you an idea, of it. And I don't think any video can do it justice of what it's really like to go down that, but pretty intense. And there's no doubt. I don't think I've ever seen my brakes smoke besides this trip. And all of our brakes were smoking on the way down, no matter how fast we were going. So.
Wow.
To just give you an idea of that landscape and on the way down. And if you want to see that whole video, you could tune into that on YouTube.
That's excellent. The landscape is just gorgeous. Definitely very different, right, from out here in the Northeast.
And that's a big reason for the trip, right? In order
Yeah.
to experience, and really a great reason for any travel is to experience new things, new places.
So we talked about, you're on the Schaefer Trail, you got a lot of switchbacks. We talked about your gear and the temperature ranges. Obviously the landscape, this picture is just phenomenal. I love, you've mentioned in our conversations, the arches, the mesas, a lot of the rock formations, and you can see the elevation differences in the mountains beyond. Talk about sort of as you walk us through these photos, how that scenery changes and how often, and take us to kind of what your first night camping out was like.
When I went to go visit Utah a couple of years ago with my son, who at the time was, I think he was 15 or 14 years old, a few days into the trip, he said, "Utah rocks," right? Because there's a lot of rocks in Utah. And eventually he became bored with all the rock. Oh, look, there's another rock,
Right.
but at the beginning, it's such a difference from what we're used to that but I don't know as though I've ever gotten used to it or lost any appreciation for just the 2 times that I've ever visited Utah. But again, the colors and as far as equipment goes, all the pictures that I took here, and I'll point out if Patrick took a picture, actually you'll just be able to tell because he has got much better equipment than I do. But these pictures are all taken with an iPhone. And I take a lot of videos with iPhones too. So again, use the equipment that you have to document whatever trip that you're going on. So, but this is, up toward the top of Schaefer looking down, and you can see the White Rim Trail heading across the valley floor. About 2,000 feet below. There's a picture of Van, and there'll be lots of pictures in this series of bicycles and the friends that I met, right? Because that's what this is also all about, right? Is meeting new people and sharing experiences. And that excites me as much as the landscape does. And I'll never forget these 2 guys, whether I ever meet up with them again or not. But so it's the relationships that you build, not only the relationships with a place, but the relationships with the people.
That's pretty cool. I'm getting butterflies in my stomach looking at this photo.
So the reason why or actually this is probably Patrick's picture, but Yeah, I wasn't that close. I don't, that's beyond my comfort level also. So, um, but there are lots of opportunities to sit at the edge of cliffs should you wanted to.
I'm sure. I think you have a few coming up where you're just kind of peering over.
That's right. That's
That's
right.
an awesome photo. I love that. That's neat.
It's
I like all these pictures.
good perspective, but I am getting down here a little lower in elevation, right? So it is getting a
Mm.
little bit warmer, and we're starting to shed some layers. Um, and again, just the mesas and the different rock formations, and of course arches, right? So you go to Arches National Park, you have these huge, beautiful arches, right? But even if you're not looking, even if you're not in a place that's famous for arches, you're
Mhm.
going to find arches like this keyhole arch within any of the parks, or really any part of Utah, even if you're not in an established national park.
There's such an amazing, obviously, depth of history, but geological history and formation, which you can see in all the striations through the photos that you're taking of the Earth even far away. It's really neat, and the coloring is just amazing.
I really wish I could talk more articulately or scientifically about that, or understood all of that a little bit better. But I will tell you that you do get an education going to these places, and you learn that, oh yeah, that green in that rock is iron, right?
Hmm.
So you start to understand. And all of these areas that I visited are these roads were created for mining. Mostly uranium mines. Uranium mines. From the turn of the century, and also during the World Wars. So um, this is one of those panoramic shots. So you're probably looking at 180 degrees worth of landscape there.
Ah,
Another
gorgeous.
arch, and this is an area that's famous down there called Monument Basin.
Hmm.
So there's basically a basin. It sits just below the trail from where we are. I should say that we're not at river bottom here, right? So we're above that and looking down, and then river bottom is probably, I don't know. These areas are described in steps, and probably several more steps into the foreground of this shot before you can get down to the river uh, um, elevation. So the first day we travel about 50 miles to get to our first night's camp. Pretty tired by the time we get to camp, but as you can see, it was worth the trip. This is our view for an entire evening and an entire next day. That is one thing on the preparation you were asking about too, Beth, is in the preparation, especially if you're going to a national park, overnight permits are, while you don't need those in the White Mountain National Park in New Hampshire, that is a thing in many Western national parks, because they control the amount of visitors, especially overnight visitors, that they get. So they have a high demand for people that want to go there, and they control it through a permitting process. So the permits that I got for this campsite, I probably got in January or so of before, 3 months ahead of time.
That was gonna be my next question.
Sure. Yeah. Of course, we do all our own cooking out there. We use camp stoves. We all bring our own camp stove, and it's mostly freeze dried food and those kind of things. So the next morning I wake up, and this is my what I wake up to, and I don't think you can beat it. Uh, so to be
Gorgeous.
wake up in your tent and have this view. This is looking out into the Needles district of Canyonlands National Park. When we're on bikepacking trips, we take lots of pictures of our bikes. So,
That's
so
okay. It's really neat to see the gear. That's very informative for anybody that might be, interested in kind of following your path along.
it is, yeah, and it is like they are like our friends, right? Because it's like our partner in a trip like this. So we do get proud of of the equipment that we use.
That's a nice looking bike.
That's all true.
So, so to get from one place to another, from one campsite to another, roughly about how many miles did you plan each day to kind of do this when you
Yeah,
moved to trail?
that's a great question. When I first planned it, I planned on this being a 2-day trip, and there was only one campsite available during that
Oh,
time period. So, but when another one opened up, and it was about 30 miles away from the one that we stayed at the first night. I gladly made a permit for that second night and was able to spend a little extra time in this area.
Very nice.
There's Patrick and Van, and they are peering into the abyss as their comfort level is a little bit better than mine. And Patrick's is especially, he doesn't mind riding right up to the edge.
Oh,
So,
looks like he lost something.
yeah. I'm not sure what he's looking for exactly. I didn't see anything fall, but yeah, he's definitely looking for something. And his van
Oh, that's neat.
traveling down, and that's an example of what the road is like, right? So it varies in some places, but there's no doubt that you'll be on one side of the same mesa and take a look up at that and have this view, and 10 minutes later you're another mile around the other side of the mesa and you're looking at the same mesa, but it looks totally different. So
That's neat.
and perspective changes too. You can see a long distance in a flat desert like this, almost as if it was like a glacier. Again, another great picture by Patrick. I don't know about the subject, but the picture was.
It's an awesome picture.
Second night's campsite, about 30 miles away from the first one. It's right on the Green River, and it's called Labyrinth, and just a beautiful area, beautiful river valley. And of course, this is our first chance that we can get some water and filter some water right out of the river.
So you went in with around 16 pounds of water when you started. So when you got to your second campsite, were you out? Were you down?
I'm out. Yep,
Okay.
I'm out. I've cooked breakfast with that water. I've cooked a dinner with that water. I've drank water for 2 days. We get to this campsite because it's only 30 miles. It doesn't take us too long to get there. So it's a fairly easy second day. And but yes, I'm all out of water. I've used up all my water. And you ration it, and this area is coming, so it's okay.
Yep. So I do want to make sure we cover the other portion of your trip. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the water and the filtration system, and sort of you come down to the Green River?
So basically you go down there with a jug of water and you pull out a jug of water and then you bring it up to the campsite, put a little alum in it. The alum helps the particulates in that silty water cling to each other, drop to the bottom, and then you can just use a regular water filter that you would use for backpacking in New Hampshire to make your water safe for drinking.
Nice. All right.
Sure. Again, the Labyrinth campsite, and then on the last day, the road out is a lot like the road in. It's called Horse Thief, and it's again a cliff with a series of switchbacks going up it. Some of the photos I have of that this is an example of one of those corners of one of those switchbacks. So it's pretty steep. And the road coming up and out of there. This is a photo that Patrick took of another group of cyclists where it just so happened that he captured all three of those cyclists lined up on different parts of the road, but all in a line on those switchbacks, which is just a pretty neat moment to capture.
That is a really neat picture.
And at the end, this is a photo of the three of us, Van and Patrick and myself. And like I said, new relationships formed, and relationships with people and relationships with places is what taking a vacation is all about, whether it's by bicycle or not.
Pretty accomplished looking group of fellows, if you will.
I'm pretty happy with it.
You look very happy. You did it.
At this point, we go into Moab and we separate. Actually, we have a meal together, and they head home, and I'm able to spend one night in Moab. Of course, this trip happens at the beginning of COVID, when we really didn't understand what we were in for. But at this point, a decision was made locally in that area to shut that area of the state down because of the lack of hospital beds. And they started to say, we might have a problem here. it's at that point that I learned that the bicycle shop that I ship my bicycle to, I'm not going to be able to ship it home, and I'm going to need to make some other arrangements, which I was able to make up in Salt Lake City without a problem. But you have to adjust your plans by a little bit. I cut this trip short by a couple of days as well because I started to hear about things. But remember, we've been in the wilderness in the backcountry for 3 days, out of touch. We had no idea what was going on. We left in one environment and we returned to a very different environment only 3 days later. We'd heard of COVID, but we really didn't understand what that was going to be like upon our return. And it had
Sure.
gotten really big in 3 days.
Yeah, it definitely, things were fast moving, and I'm glad you were able to have the time you did.
Sure. Uh, so so they head home, and the next day I head out to this other area for 2 days, and I'll just show you a couple of pictures of that. It is an area called San Rafael Swell, and this was the solo part of my trip. So this part of the trip took on a bit of a different flavor, but it's called the Swell because of the rock formations that are within it, and you'll notice from this picture that it looks like an ocean wave, and it's a place where I wish I understood it better geologically, but a place where the earth forced up the rock, and it formed an area of these gigantic, huge ocean wave looking rock formations.
That's neat.
This is a map of the route, though it doesn't show you much. It does give you an example of what you'd find on a website like bikepacking.com. If you were looking for ideas about places to go, bikepacking.com is a great place to go visit, and you can find hundreds all over the world routes that other people have taken and rode their bikes, with pictures about that area, and it gives you a little bit of the local intel, such as where to find water.
That's neat. We'll make sure we have those links for folks too.
Again, this area was an area of a mining community, and from days gone by, but a lot of the roads in this area were created for that reason as well. And the first trail that we go on is called Behind the Reef Road. Again, that ocean reference, behind the reef. So just behind those ocean waves. And it was pretty rugged trail. Again, I don't, though a four-wheeler might be able to go down that road, a Jeep may not be able to.
Quick question on the trails. Are they marked? Are they easy to find?
It depends. Yeah, it depends. So on this particular loop, there were areas that were very obvious, and there were areas that maybe you had to second guess yourself a little bit. But for the most part, they were. Yeah.
Well, this is an interesting photo.
So I think the miners left behind many old vehicles, and every time I came upon one, I take a picture of my bike with that old vehicle. So that's the series of three photos here that I took all on different places of the road. Again, old mining area. This is an old miner's cabin. You can go in there, check out the stuff in there. I have a lot of different photos of all the equipment that they had left behind when they left this area. Again, all of these mines are from different places, but while they're all sealed shut at this point, you can still go there, visit them, and see all of that old equipment and imagine what it would be like to work in one of those mines.
That's pretty neat. A lot of history here.
It's got huge historical significance, including this. So while we go back only 100 years for the mines, we go back thousands of years to the natives from the area to see petroglyphs in the rocks. And there's so many places where you can do these, but this is an area of the San Rafael Swell where you can capture some petroglyphs. And in fact, what I learned about this is that the symbols on the left were thousands of years older than the symbols of the right, but they all persevere. But you can see where some parts of it were worn away from weather over the years.
Absolutely
and just
fascinating.
try to imagine the people that lived here in that area and what they were thinking, and taking the time to record their history in this way.
That's fascinating. And it makes you realize, yeah, there's a lot of rocks out here, but guess what? There's a lot of hidden gems within those rocks. So that's pretty neat.
You're not kidding. It's an area of the road where they blasted through to
Mm.
make the road go through. Um, and then just a few more landscape shots. And of course, you have the contrast of the sky against the different types of rocks and the different minerals that are in those rocks to make them those different colors. This is a large keyhole arch looking up into the hillside from, actually, that's from one of those mines, and rock formations of all different kinds and shapes. And this photo is my final morning of the trip. And I woke up that morning not being sure that I was going to leave the area, but I thought maybe I might be cutting the trip a little bit short at this point. And then tuning into the radio and finding out that, yeah, airlines are starting to be affected, and maybe I want to make sure I can get back to New Hampshire. And I had a good experience flying home as well, with very few people in an airport and very few people in an airplane. So
Sure.
in any case, sunrises and sunsets, and this is my final sunrise in Utah on that trip.
Absolutely beautiful. And you can't leave out another picture of your bike.
That's right.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for sharing your photos, your video, and the experiences that you had. I have a gazillion more questions that I think it'd be really kind of neat if I'm going to suggest to our viewers that maybe you stay tuned and check us out again for some future backcountry bike packing trips with Scott. And I think you talked about, we can do this right in our own backyard. And I believe one of the topics we're going to discuss in the very near future would be sort of backcountry bike packing here in New Hampshire.
You bet.
So,
Love to show you New Hampshire from a bicycle.
awesome. We're looking forward to it. And then maybe we can even work in some safety measures on another segment. What do you do when you're out in the backcountry and if you run into a problem with the bike or you need to get in touch with anybody? So stay tuned for all of these really fun and adventurous travel videos that we have coming up. Thank you so much, Scott. Take care.
Thank you. Have a great one.
You too.